Welcome to another lab in Network Support Services, Windows Networking. I will be hosting this lab in Hyper-V. You as the student will follow along, answering all questions and taking the appropriate screenshots as shown in your worksheet. So let's begin. 70-740 Lab 9, Configuring Storage, and this is in association with our Lesson 9, Configuring Hyper-V Storage. In this lab, we're going to be working in our Hyper-V once more. I'll be doing the demonstration. You'll be following along as the introduction indicated. Unfortunately, we can't do this in ACE IT Lab while we're doing our social distancing. This exercise is going to have our LUN-DC1. We'll have to have that running, so I'll go ahead and get that started right now. And then we're also going to be working with our SRV1. So we'll get that started as well. In this lab, we'll be performing a number of exercises, including creating a virtual hard disk, editing a virtual hard disk file, creating a VM with an existing hard disk, configuring quality of service on a virtual hard disk, and we'll wrap it up by looking at how we go about creating a checkpoint, and then we'll reset our servers as part of our cleanup routine. So let's get into the lab. In our first exercise, we're going to be creating a virtual hard disk. We're going to use the Hyper-V Management Console to create a virtual hard disk. After you create a virtual machine in Windows Server 2016 Hyper-V, you emulate all the standard components that you would typically find in a physical computer. We talked about this in our lesson. A virtual processor, virtual memory, virtual network adapter. Well, Hyper-V uses a specialized virtual hard disk, that's a VHD format, to package part of the space on a physical disk and make it appear to the virtual machine as a physical hard disk. So let's get to it and open up our SVR1. We'll go ahead and we'll connect and get logged in. And the next thing we need to do is we need to go and get Hyper-V started. Now, what I would recommend is if you have an application, if you have a service, if you have a console that you use on a regular basis, when you've opened that up, go ahead and right-click on it down in your system tray and tell it to pin it to the taskbar. This is what I've done here. If I close that out, you can see it still resides there. So I can just simply click on it there. I don't have to go up to Tools to get access to it. In our Hyper-V Manager, what we're going to do is we're going to go to New, Virtual Hard Disk. And in the wizard, we're going to go ahead and we're going to click Next. And on the Choose Disk Format, we're going to answer our first two questions. Not just one, but two. Question number 1. Under which conditions might it be necessary to create a VHD file rather than a VHDX? Well, what did we talk about in our lesson? VHDX is supported with what? Windows Server 2012 and newer? If you're going to be working on a server that's, for example, Windows Server 2008 R2, you won't have any choice. You're going to have to be using the VHD because that earlier format of Hyper-V didn't support VHDX. There is no choice. So the answer to question 1 is if you're planning to use the file on a server running an earlier version of Hyper-V, you must use the Hyper-D file format. So there's your answer, but let me throw this in there as well just to expand on it. So if you have multiple versions of Hyper-V in your production environment, you might have Windows Server 2016, you might have Windows Server 2019, you may have Windows Server 2012 R2, but maybe you've got Windows Server 2008 R2. and you need to have the ability to migrate virtual machines and their associated files like the VHD to that Windows Server 2008 R2, you're going to need to make that as a VHD because that R2 won't support the VHDX. Plan ahead. Now, if we do select VHDX, which is what we're going to do here, question number 2, what is the maximum size of the VHDX file? What is the maximum size that you can create for VHDX? Well, it says it right there in the explanation, doesn't it? This format supports virtual disks up to 64 terabyte. So the answer for question number 2 is 64 terabytes. Make sure you've got that answer, and we're going to click Next. On our Choose Disk Type, we're going to select Fixed Size. We're going to specify exactly how large we want this disk to be. We're going to click Next, and for the name, we're going to type Fixed 1. Just that simple. We're going to click Next. Now, for the configured disk, we're going to change the size from the 127 gig, and we're going to make it 20. We're going to click Next. On our summary screen, I'd like everyone to take a screenshot and paste that into step number 10. All right, if you've got your screenshot, we're going to go ahead and click Finish. And we've created a virtual hard disk. If I look here in File Explorer, where is it being stored? Who knows where it's being stored? Remember I created that second disk to attach to this system? It's over here in the storage array, right? Is it? Well, where is it? Wait a minute. How do you know where you're storing files? Click on Hyper-V Settings. Right here. We never changed the default location, remember? These things are all being stored in simply the default location that Hyper-V Manager would have out of the box. It's in Users, Public, Documents, Hyper-V, Virtual Hard Disk. So let's take a look there. Users, Public, Documents, Hyper-V, Virtual Hard Disk. There it is. And remember, we said it was a fixed size, so it immediately grabbed 20 gig and assigned it to it. So 20 gigabytes of our drive C has been assigned to that. So we can see that we're already down to less than 96 gigabytes free on this hard disk. See, that's the dilemma of using the fixed size. Okay, let's move on. On our second exercise, we're going to be editing a virtual hard disk file. And in this exercise, we're going to open up that hard disk that we created, and we're going to modify it while it's online. After a virtual hard disk is created, you can expand the drive as needed, as long as you do have free disk space. You can also compress that virtual disk. We're going to go into Edit Disk. And with Edit Disk here on the Actions column, we can select any disks that we want to manage. So we're going to click Edit Disk, we're going to click Next, and we're going to browse to that disk that we created. We're going to select the fixed one and click Open. And then we're back on the Locate Virtual Hard Disk File. See, now we've specified the disk that we want to work with. We're going to click Next. On the Choose Action page, we're going to select Expand. And we're going to click Next. And it's the next thing we're going to say is, hey, how much would you like to expand this to? Well, we're going to expand it up to 25 gigabytes. So what's that going to do? It's going to grab an additional 5 gigabytes away from our hard storage. Now, before we click Next, let's answer question number 3. What's the maximum size you can expand the drive to? It's right there. See it in parentheses? 64 terabytes. Remember, a VHDX can be a maximum of 64 terabytes. Now, could we do that? Well, we don't have enough disk space to do that, but that's your answer. That's the maximum size that you could expand this drive to. Question number 3, 64 terabyte or TB. Abbreviated TB, that's just fine. Let's go ahead and click next. And on your summary screen, this is your next screenshot. Go ahead and take a screenshot and paste it into step number 7. If you've got that screenshot, we're clicking finish, and exercise 2 is done. Let's move on to our third exercise, which is creating a virtual machine with an existing hard disk. In this exercise, we're going to create a new virtual machine using an existing VHD. Creating virtual disk image files as a separate process enables you to exercise more control over their capabilities. After creating the VHD or VHDX files, you must then add them to a VM for them to be useful. So for our third exercise, we're going to go ahead and we're going to click New, and we're going to select the virtual machine. On the Before You Begin screen, we'll click Next. For the name, we're going to call it VM4. Then we're going to click Next. For our generation page, we're going to simply leave it selected as Gen 1, and we'll click Next. 1024 is already selected. We're also going to put a check mark by Use Dynamic Memory. We're going to click Next. Under the Configure Networking, we're going to leave it with no network. Remember, we haven't created any virtual switches for this Hyper-V system. Click Next. On the Connect Virtual Hard Disk, we're going to select Use an Existing Virtual Hard Disk. And we saw this in our lesson, right? Now, let's go ahead and answer question number 4. Now, you may need to refer to what you learned in your lesson to answer this question. To use a pass-through disk, which option should be selected? What is it? Physical hard disk. Remember that a pass-through disk is a physical disk connected to your Hyper-V host, that physical system that's hosting Hyper-V, but the disk is offline because you're going to make a pass-through disk, and it's going to allow that virtual machine to seize control of that physical disk. So the answer to question number 4 is physical hard disk. We're going to select Browse, and we're going to use our fixed disk 1 and click Open. Back on our Connect Virtual Hard Disk file, we've selected the disk that we want to use. We're going to click Next. Here again, on our summary screen, I'd like everyone to take a screenshot and get that pasted into step number 10. Okay, everyone should have that screenshot. We're clicking Finish. We've created a virtual machine and we've connected it to a pre-existing hard disk. Our exercise 3 is done. Let's take a look at exercise 4, which is configuring quality of service on a virtual hard disk. That's QoS. Here again, we're going to create a new virtual machine using an existing VHD. Because it's common for there to be more than one virtual hard disk hosted by a single physical hard disk, it's possible for one virtual disk to monopolize the I/O, the input-output capacity of a physical disk. This causes the other virtual disks to slow down. To prevent this, Windows Server 2016 enables you to control the QoS, the quality of service, for a given virtual hard disk. This will ensure high-quality performance for critical applications. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to right-click on VM4, and we're going to go to Settings. In those settings, we're going to go down and we're going to select our fixed 1 virtual hard disk. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to expand that node. See the little plus sign there? And now we can see quality of service. We're going to select quality of service, and we're going to put a check mark beside Enable QoS Management. In the IOPS, that's Input Output Operations per Second, we're going to select 50 for the minimum, and we're going to set 400 for the maximum. So not only can you define the minimum value for what you want the performance to be, but you can also define the upper end. What's the maximum it could actually utilize? Go ahead and take a screenshot and put this into step number 5. If we've got our screenshot, we're going to go ahead and we're going to click OK. We've defined quality of service. It's just that simple. Let's do our lab challenge, which is creating a checkpoint. In this exercise, we're going to confirm the virtual machine checkpoint configuration. We'll then create a checkpoint for the virtual machine. Understand that in Hyper-V, a checkpoint is a snapshot or a captured image. It's like a picture of the state, data, and hardware configuration of a VM at a particular moment in time. Windows Server 2016 has the ability to provide production checkpoints and standard checkpoints. We talked about the difference between those two in your lesson. Each virtual machine can have a maximum of 50 checkpoints. Here again, we're going to go ahead and we're going to right-click our VM4 and select Settings. And in our settings, we're going to go ahead and under the Management section, we're going to scroll down so we can see the whole Management section. We're going to click on the Checkpoints node. Let's go ahead and answer question number 5. What type of checkpoint is the virtual machine configured to use? Well, by default, it's configured to use production checkpoints. Answer to question 5 is obviously production checkpoints. Let's answer question number 6. Where are the checkpoints stored? Well, you can see it right there. By default, they're stored in C:\program data /Microsoft /Windows /Hyper-V. There's your answer to question number 6. And you'll notice that were you to want to, you could store the checkpoints for a specific virtual machine in a specific location. Let's answer question number 7. What does a production checkpoint use to make a better backup that's closer to the state of the system when the checkpoint is created? Who remembers this from the lesson? Because you'll see there's nothing on here to tell you why that production checkpoint's better, is there? No, there's not. You need to have read your lesson. But here's your answer. VSS, the Volume Shadow Copy Service. This is the technology that allows us to make a checkpoint that's much better. It's a closer checkpoint. It's a closer, think of it this way. Pictures and TVs and video used to not be so high resolution. Yeah, it was a good picture, but maybe it wasn't as defined as it should be. Nowadays, we've got very high resolution. So you can see the individual eyelashes, hair, the greatest amount of depth. Think of it that way. Those production checkpoints give you a greater depth into that snapshot. Okay, so your answer to question number 7, I know I went a little bit deeper there. Your answer to question 7 is VSS. Okay, we're going to click OK. Now, once we've clicked OK, we're going to right-click on that VM4. And how do we create a manual checkpoint? How do we manually do that? Well, we simply go checkpoint. And there it is. Now, were we to make changes to this machine and corruption occur, or it didn't work the way we wanted to, or perhaps we're doing a demonstration, and at the end of that demonstration, we want to revert that checkpoint back to where it was before we started, we could simply right-click on that checkpoint and say Apply. And now we apply the checkpoint, and we've reverted it back. Let's go ahead, take a screenshot, and paste it into step number 5. Now, you've got that screenshot. What are we going to do? The next step is, well, you may get many checkpoints. You need to do your management, because every time you make one of these checkpoints, it creates a new hard disk file. It's a point in time, remember? Let's take a look let's take a quick look back at our location where this is all being stored. Public, documents, Hyper-V, virtual hard disk. See, now we haven't made any changes to it yet, but this will continue to grow from here. So what we want to do is we're going to right click and we're going to delete this checkpoint. Any changes that we've made to the virtual machine since the checkpoint has been created will get merged back into the original disk image. We're going to delete checkpoint. It says, are you sure? We'll go ahead and select delete. And were this a larger image, you would have seen a status of it being merged right now. Here again, if we go back in and we go to our users, public, documents, Hyper-V, virtual hard disk, see that other file is gone. We've done our lab challenge. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to reset our server, and we're simply going to right click on VM4 and click delete and delete. Now here's the thing, I deleted the virtual machine, but that storage is still being allocated. That virtual hard disk is still there. Now they're not telling us to delete it. I don't think we're going to use it again, but for now it's not going to hurt anything, so I'm simply going to leave that there. Alright, that is the end of Lab 9 in 70-740. This was a fairly short lab. It's fairly concise. Some of these labs are shorter, some of them are longer, just like our lessons. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next lab or lesson.